try it again. All right, I assume it's recording.
Yes.
All right, welcome everybody. Today we're having a seminar that is hosted by the chess.com Black Lives Matter Club. And I am National Master Dan Heisman, and I'm glad to be giving the seminar. It is a fundraising seminar, and we have posted the GoFundMe page for our charity that we're not charity, but for our fundraising effort, and we'll be posting it with the video as well. So today's seminar is just on general chess improvement. If you don't know me, I've been teaching chess for over 50 years. I hate to say that, it sounds terrible. And I've written 12 chess books, and one of my chess books, for instance, is called A Guide to Chess Improvement, which was published by Everyman. So my expertise is how do people improve at chess? And we're going to take questions from our seminar audience and talk about that, but I thought I'd lead off with the main idea about getting better at chess. And it sounds crazy, but it's, oh, hold on a second. Excuse me, little throat clear. It sounds crazy, but what you need to do to improve at chess is to figure out how you can find better chess moves. Now, people say to me, that's ridiculous. That's like saying in order to be an Olympic sprinter, you have to learn how to run faster. That doesn't make any sense. But actually, it makes a lot of sense. And let's talk about it for a minute. How can you find a better chess move? Well, a lot of people, when they first start playing chess, think the way to find better chess moves is simply to memorize better chess moves. Okay, well, that's true in a lot of cases. Let's say someone plays c4, English opening, and you're black, and you say, I don't know anything about the English opening. I have no idea what move I should play here. So in that case, you're just going to use some general principles. Well, in a sense, the better you use those general principles, the better you're going to find your chess moves. But in the long run, that's not going to be sufficient for every opening. You just are not going to be able to figure out everything from scratch and reinvent the wheel. So the way to find a better chess move when you're playing something like this would be to look at an opening book or in a database or even ask an engine and say, what should I play here? What's a good opening against the English? So you might go to a database and the database might say, all right, well, here's a line against the English, e5, and if he plays knight c3, you play knight f6, and if he plays g3, you play d5, and so on, and you try to look at those lines over and over again. What you're doing here is you're increasing your knowledge. You're simply adding knowledge so that next time when someone plays c4, you don't have to figure it out. You say, oh, the database told me to play e5. So e5 is a better move than I could figure out because maybe I figured out that I should play, b6, and the database says that that doesn't work out quite as well. So you're adding to your knowledge. This is how you can improve in several aspects of the game. Another aspect of the game would be, let's say if you have a tactic. Let's bring up a common tactic. Number 22 in my ICC library. Okay, white to play. Well, if you give this position to a beginner and you say white to play, he's going to look at it and he's going to say, wow, I can play queen takes h7 check and chase the king around the board. And he's going to maybe even try doing that. But if he does enough puzzle books, he's going to recognize that this is one of the most famous puzzles in chess. The name of this puzzle, the name of this tactic is called Philidor's Legacy. And everybody who studies basic tactics books gets to see this puzzle over and over again. I think I saw it in at least 10 different books when I was a beginner. And the answer to the puzzle is, oh, you can learn this pattern. Queen c4 check. Doesn't do him any good to put the queen in the way. Doesn't do him any good to put the rook in the way. If he plays his king to f8, we have mate in 1. So therefore, he's going to try king to h8. I'm going to now check him with the knight on f7. Why? Because he only has one move to go g8. And now I'll play here, which is called double check. All right, when king is in double check, he has to move. And again, if he plays king f8, I have queen f7 checkmate. So now he's going to play king h8. Well, why did I put my knight on h6? The idea now is so that the knight is guarding the g8 square so that when I sacrifice my queen, he can't take it with the king. He could have done that in the original position. If I had played queen check and he played here and I play check now, well, I could do something silly and hope that he takes with the rook and then I could checkmate him. But if I'm playing someone who's any good at all, they're going to take with the king, and then I'm going to be, uh-oh, that wasn't so smart. So the reason why I check with the knight and then I check on h6 is now when I play queen g8 check, he has no choice. He has to take with the rook, and now I get a smothered mate, knight f7. So this pattern is very easily studied. It's what in psychologists would call a chunk. It's a piece of information that you say, are all the things in place? Yes. All right, I know this chunk. It's as if you're learning one thing. It's like if you saw the word the and you didn't know what it was and you sounded it out and you said T-H-E, t-h-uh. It's a t-h-uh word. Well, that's different. But when you're a good reader in English and you see T-H-E, you don't even think of the word the. You're just reading the paragraph for the importance of what you're reading. You don't even care, what the individual words are. You care about what the author is trying to tell you. So the same thing happens in chess as you build up your tactical and your combinational capabilities. These things become chunks so that you learn them as a group. So you're learning queen c4. So again, this is knowledge. Okay, let's do one more knowledge thing. Let's take a king and a pawn against a king. King and pawn and a king. Okay, and let's say white plays king to e4, and you wonder, what should I play for black and what should the result be? Well, you might think maybe I should go back and guard the promotion square, or maybe I should do this or that. But you can study this in an endgame book or in a video. And what they're going to tell you is, don't let the white king in front of the pawn. So therefore, you got to play king d6 or king e6. So let's say you play king d6. It really doesn't matter. If somebody tells you you have to play king e6 to get the opposition, then they're not teaching you right, because there is no opposition when the king's not in front of the pawn. It doesn't matter. So you could just as well play king to d6. And at some point, white's going to have to push the pawn if he wants to make progress. If he just keeps moving the king around, black will just keep moving his king around in front of the pawn. So at some point, white will push the pawn. And now again, your knowledge will tell you that black has 4 legal moves, and actually 3 of them draw. King c5 loses to king to e5, but king c7 is a draw, king d7 is a draw, king e7 is a draw. This is all book knowledge. Now, some people tell all their students, you got to go straight back. Well, going straight back will draw, but in this position, you don't have to go straight back. It's perfectly good to go king c7, king e5, king d7. And now again, if white wants to push the pawn at some point, he will. And now black has the second rule. The first rule was don't let the king in front of the pawn. And the second rule is once the pawn reaches the 6th rank, you no longer have 3 moves that draw. You have to go straight back. Every other move loses. For instance, king to e8, king e6, king d8, d7, king c7, king e7. And now, obviously, black is going to lose. White's going to get a queen. So black has the wrong tempos when he goes back diagonally. So he has to go straight back here. And now if white tries to come up, black will go in front of him. Again, this is not the opposition. I've seen so many teachers call this the opposition. It's no more the opposition here than it was back there. But you are opposing his king, if we want to use the English word opposing. But this is not the opposition. The opposition is when the king's in front of the pawn. Here, the white king's not in front of the pawn. So if you want to call it opposition, you can. There's no official dictionary of chess. But as far as I'm concerned, this is not the same concept as opposition. But anyway, black's going to play king e8. And now if white retreats, black will just block the pawn again. So at some point, white will push the pawn. And now black has the correct tempos. He can play king to d8. And now white has a choice. He can play a whole bunch of king moves that give up the pawn, and we get a draw by lack of mating material. Or he can play king d6 and get a stalemate. So in this position, after king e4, it's book. I'm not analyzing much. I'm simply playing off of my memory and my knowledge on what black needs to do. And you might say to me, well, Dan, look, you've showed me all these examples of all this knowledge that I need to do to get better. Isn't that what I need to do, is just keep adding all this knowledge? I'll keep adding more tactics and more endgames and more openings, and I'll get to be a better player. And the answer is not on your life. The problem is that if you play a 40-move game, probably only maybe 10 moves out of the 40 will fall under this knowledge category. It could be more, it could be less, The problem is, what do you do on the other 30 moves? And the other 30 moves is really what determines how good you are. For instance, let's get back to our opening example. Suppose we play c4 and black plays e5 and we ask, what's the playing strength of black? Well, if a computer says this is the best move and the computer's playing at 3600, we could say you're playing at 3600 while you're in the book. And as long as you're playing book moves, you're still playing like a 3600. But let's say we get out of our book here and White now plays h3 or something, and you're on your own and you have to figure out what to do. And now you start figuring things out and you start figuring them out at your level. Well, let's say your rating is 1400. What's going to happen is when you start thinking on your own and you start analyzing the position and evaluating the moves, you're going to be playing at a 1400 level. Well, if you play a few moves at 3600 and you play the whole rest of the moves at 1400, your rating is going to be about 1400. It's not going to be the average of all the moves. Your chain is as good as strong as your weakest link. It only takes one bad move to lose a game. So if you play 6 moves at 3600 and then you play 34 moves at 1400, your playing strength for the game is basically 1400. Well, but how would you get to 1500 then? Would it be memorizing more opening moves? Well, there's only so much you can memorize. If you learn 8 moves in the opening and in every variation, and then you want to study a 9th move, and he has 3 more moves and you have 3 more moves to look at on the 9th move, everything's multiplying by 9 times as much information every time you go another move deep. So you can't memorize the whole game. It's not possible. There's too many reasonable moves and too many permutations. So you're going to get out of your book. If you learn 7 moves and then you spend a couple years studying and now you're up to 8 or 9 moves, you know, you could spend a few more years studying and maybe you'll get up to 10 moves. And unless you know what your opponent's going to play, it's not going to be much more. You're going to be getting out of your book. So studying more opening moves is just not going to improve your rating that much. In fact, I ask people the following question. Suppose you're a 1400 player and you say, Dan, I'm not very good against e4. And I say, oh, I have the answer for you. I am going to give you a pill which will allow you to memorize a book on the Caro-Can. My question to my students is, if they're not very good against e4 and I give them a pill and they can memorize an entire book on the Caro-Can, what will their rating be after they memorize that book? And I think most people get it right. The answer is maybe 1430, because you'll be very comfortable when people play e4 against you. The problem comes in several instances. What if you're playing another beginner who, after he plays e4 and you play c6 and you study all these lines where he plays d4, and instead the guy plays like knight f3, and all of a sudden you go, wow, there's a little note in the back of the book that just says I can just play d5 and get an okay game, but then I'm out of my book after 2 moves. So all my studying of that book from the pill that I took doesn't help me, because my opponent didn't play any of the main lines. Or let's say my opponent fianchettos his bishop. There's no move in my book on what to do on b3, so it doesn't help you when he takes you out of the book. And how does the book help you if White opens up d4? Well, it doesn't. You can't play the Caro-Can against d4 unless you play c6 and he decides not to play c4, or knight f3 if he decides to let you transpose. Okay, now you're back in your book, assuming you recognize the transposition, which a lot of people don't. All right, but what happens when you're White? How does that book help you? Well, it helps you if you're an e4 player and your opponent plays the Caro-Can, then you say, oh, I remember this from my book. But what if you're an e4 player and your opponent plays e5? Or what if he plays c5? Or what if he plays e6? Well, then all that pill that I gave you isn't going to help you. That's why a 1400 player taking a pill to memorize an entire book on a Caro-Can would only gain a few rating points. It's just not going to help them that much, because it's only going to help them for a few moves against some opponents in certain situations. And other than that, it's not going to help him. It's not going to make him a 2200 player, except when he's playing black for the first few moves in a book Caro-Can. Okay, so that's a problem. Now let's look at the problem from a different point of view. Let's say both players are rated 1800, or let's say you have a player rated 1800. And now let's clone that player. We're gonna make a duplicate of that player, but the clone's gonna have a flaw. The clone will on 2 moves a game, not try very hard at all. He's just going to play the very first move he sees. So normally he's going to play like an 1800 player. He's the clone of an 1800 player. He knows everything the 1800 player knows. He analyzes like an 1800 player analyzes. But now, for 2 moves a game, he's going to just make some dumb move as fast as he can see. What would his rating be if he doesn't try his hardest on those 2 moves? He just really doesn't try hard at all. Well, I don't know. John, have we ever talked about this? Do you have a guess on what that is?
We've not talked about it, but I would guess that it would probably go down to about somewhere in the 1500s pretty quickly.
At least, yeah. Yeah, so let's compare the pill that we took for the Caro-Can with the clone. The pill gained about 30 rating points, but the clone, by not trying hard on 2 moves a game, lost 300 rating points. That's 10 times, or 1 order of magnitude, more than you got from taking a pill that memorized an entire book on the Caro-Can, which of course nobody really could do. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that A, trying your best on every move and doing the very best you can means a lot more to how good you are in chess than whether you memorize an entire book on the Caro-Can. But it also tells us something else. Why is that 1800, 1800, and why is the 1500, 1500 when their knowledge is the same? After all, if the 1500 isn't trying very hard, he still has the same book knowledge. He doesn't have to try very hard to say, oh, this is a book move. The problem is, it's those other 30-some moves a game where you don't know what to do, and you're not following, you're not in, let's go back to our Philidor's Legacy here. See, here's a position, it's like the opening. It's a book position. Even though there's many, many ways you can get into Philidor's Legacy, I could change a lot of the pieces around on the board. I could give white some more pawns. I could give black, bishop on h6. I could give black a pawn on b7. I could change the position a lot, and we still have the same basic pattern that's going to work for Philidor's Legacy here. So there's lots and lots and lots of positions where Philidor's Legacy could work. I could start with my knight on a different square. I could start with my knight on maybe d6. So Philidor's Legacy has a lot of similar patterns. Many, 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 but they're all Philidor's Legacy. But those other 30-some moves a game are just some random position. In fact, let's pick up a random position to show you what we mean. Okay. Eugene, can you give me a number between 1 and 130?
Sure, 16.
16. We're going to pick up the ICC's database of the Paris tournament last year. 16, Mamadurov against Nepomniachtchi. They just call him Nepo. It's easier than pronouncing his name. Okay, so Mamadurov against Nepo. Let's go to move 25. So we'll go forward 48, ply here. Okay, so Eugene, have you ever seen this position before?
No.
Okay, do you see anything book about this position? Is this a book endgame, a book opening? Is this a book anything?
No, it's just a random middle game position.
It's a random middle game position. So Eugene, if you had to play a move here, you're a master. How would you go about it? Would you use your memory to try to go into your memory and try to figure out what white should be doing here?
I would probably start by calculating some
right
lines and see if anything's good. Yeah.
You would use analysis, right?
Yes.
You would analyze the position, and then you would evaluate what you've analyzed to see which line you like the best. So let's do a little bit of that right here. Let's do analysis, and we'll see how much of what I'm doing involves memory and things that I learned in the opening and the middle game and principles and so on. Well, the first thing I'm going to look at, one of the things that is in my memory is when somebody makes a move, I'm going to ask the question, what are all the things that move does? Well, one of the obvious things that it does is it attacks my knight on e3, which is not guarded. But only a beginner would stop here and say, oh, that's what it does. I need to find all the ways to save my knight. Well, if you do that, and it turns out queen to g5 is doing other things, you could lose the game very quickly. So let's ask if there's any other things that queen g5 does. Well, okay, there are some things. For instance, he can play knight to h5. Why is that dangerous? Because his bishop will be attacking my rook, and then his knight can play to f4 check, which might be a very, very good square to have his knight on with his queen on g5. And so he's got some ideas here besides simply attacking the knight that I have to be careful for. He's got a discovery with his knight on my rook, which is not guarded. So I have more things to worry about here than just how to save my knight. I got to worry about what's going to happen on his other moves. Let's take all these lines off the board. Okay, so after queen to g5, all right, is he doing anything else besides the discovery on the rook, the attack on the knight, and the possibility of maybe getting his knight to f4? The answer is, well, my g3 pawn is okay. My e4 pawn might be okay. I'm attacking his pawns on the queen side, but it doesn't look like I'm going to have any time to take them off. So let's start thinking now about all the ways I could save the knight. I don't want to just find one and do the first one I see. Let's say the first one I see is king to f2. I don't just want to play king f2 right away and then say, okay, I'm going to wait and see what he does. I call that hope chess. Hope chess is where you make a move and you don't look at your opponent's checks, captures, and threats. And then when he makes one, you hope there's a way out of it. For instance, suppose I play king f2 and he plays knight g4 check. And I go, uh-oh, I didn't see that. And then I start saying, but I could take the knight. And then I start realizing, uh-oh, if I take the knight, he's going to take my rook, and I'm going to be in big trouble. Well, that's what happens to people when they say he's attacking my knight. How do I save it? I guess I can guard it. I'll play king f2. So you don't want to do that. You want to analyze the position. So let's make a list of all the moves that might save the knight. All right, so king f2 is one of them. If we're just going to guard the knight, we could play rook to d3. We could play queen to c3. We could play queen to c1. We could play bishop to c1. I think those are ways of guarding the knight. How about moving the knight? We could move the knight to g4. We could move it to f5. We could move it to d5. We could move it to c4. We could move it to c2. We could move it to d1. We could move it to f1. We can't move it to g2. There's a king there. Some of those moves that I said don't look very good. If I play knight f5 and he just takes it with a pawn, what's the point? If I play knight g4 and he plays knight takes g4, I can take back with f takes g4, but then he's attacking my rook anyway, and I'm losing the g4 pawn, so that doesn't look very good, but I'll worry about that later. Well, is there any other way of saving the knight besides moving the knight or guarding it? Well, the answer is yes, I can block the line. I could block the line with two things. I could play queen f4 and block the line with my queen, or I could play f4 and block the line with my pawn. Now we could look for counterattacking moves. Can I just give him the knight and do something? Could I play a check? Queen takes f7 check. If he takes with the king and I check him again, like rook to d7, and he takes my rook with his knight, I'm just losing all my pieces, and that really didn't get very far. So I'm not so sure checking him here is such a great idea. Could I play rook to d8 and attack him that way? Well, if he takes my knight, queen takes e3, and I play rook takes e8 check, and he plays knight takes e8, I'm losing my knight in that line. Am I getting anything for it? I'm not quite sure I'm getting very much. That probably doesn't look very promising to counterattack with rook d8. So what does that kind of leave us? Well, it leaves us with moves like f4 and queen f4 and knight d5 and knight c4 and knight c2 and knight d1 and knight f1. Okay, but a lot of those moves allow him to discover on my rook, but I'm okay to let him discover on my rook if he can't do anything. So for instance, if I play kind of a strange looking move like knight f4 and he plays a discovery on my rook like knight h5, I can simply move my rook somewhere. I could play rook to d7. And the question is, could he take advantage of that with something like knight f4 check? And the answer is no. I could play queen takes f4, and I think I'm in good shape there. So what I'm doing now is I'm analyzing, but I'm also using a skill called visualization. So I'm saying, if I play this move, which I'm not saying is a good move, and I'm saying if he tries to play here and get a discovery on my rook, I can play rook to d7. I'm visualizing this in my mind. And I'm also seeing my knight and my rook are stopping him from checking me down here. And I'm saying if he tries to play this tricky check because I can't take him with a pawn, at the very least, maybe I can just take him with the queen now. So that's what I was saying, and that's what I'm looking at. I'm using my analysis skills, and one of my analysis skills is visualization. I'm visualizing what the board is going to look like. And then I am going ahead and I'm using some of my deductive logic and some of my experience in playing to figure out what some of these moves are. So, but there's nothing special about knight f1 other than it guards the d2 square. I could move my knight somewhere else. I could go to d1 or c2 or c4, but then he still has all those discoveries on the rook. Now, if I use a little deductive logic here, I could say, is there any move that gets the rook out of that line and saves the knight? And the answer is yes, that one move is rook to d3. So I could play rook to d3 and get my rook out of the line of the bishop, and it would guard the knight. Is there anything wrong with that? No, but a little bit of what we said earlier is, can he play like knight h5 and knight f4 check and then fork my king and my rook since I can't take him with a pawn? And the answer is not if I don't move the queen. If I move the queen, then that'll work. For instance, rook d3, queen not queen h5, knight h5. Rook, queen takes b7. That doesn't work because of knight f4 check. And Charles Hertan was very nice. He came up with a name for this idea. He calls this a sneaky pin. A sneaky pin is when the square that a pin piece is not really guarding gets taken advantage of. So knight f4 check is a sneaky pin move. And I really appreciate Charles Hertan giving this a name, because when you give names to things like hope chess and sneaky pin, it makes it easier to teach them. It makes it easier to remember them. So knight f4 check would win the rook if I moved the queen off that diagonal. But of course I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't move the queen off the diagonal. All right, I don't want to take the whole seminar and try to figure out what White's best move is here. We can see what Mamedyarov did, and we can ask the computer what he did, and we could learn a little bit from that. So right now, they're only playing a 25-10 game. So part of what Mamedyarov is going to do is going to use a reasonable amount of time on the move. One of the things that makes you a better chess player is called time management. And time management tells you, based on the position and based on the clock situation, how much time you can take. Well, we've already taken several minutes talking about this move, but Mamedyarov only has 14.5 minutes left, and he's got a 25-10 game, and he's only on move 25, so he needs to play a lot of moves. So he probably can't take much more than a minute on this move. If he takes a minute and he gets 10 seconds on his clock will go down by 50 seconds. I doubt it even did that. If I had to take a guess, I would say Mamedyarov played this move in 30 seconds and his clock went down 20. Let's ask the other seminar people what they think. Eugene, how much time do you think Mamedyarov took on this move?
I would say maybe a minute, because there are a bunch of different alternatives here.
Okay, reasonable guess. I don't know how many. We still just have John there. We might have a couple other people join us.
This is John. I'll split the difference and say 45.
I feel like I'm on The Price is Right, and I'm sure to lose.
That's the Price is Right strategy.
Right, I'm sure to lose here. The first one is going to lose. All right, so let's see how much time Mamedyarov took. Wow, he surprises. He actually took a minute and 45 seconds or so on that move. And he did play rook d3, which is the move that gets the rook out of the line. By the way, when you have a move like this where it matters what you do, that's called a critical position. And recognizing when you have a critical position and when you need to spend more time to analyze is part of your skill. All right, so of everything that we did here, we'll check what the computer says in a second. But before we do that, Eugene, what percentage of what we did do you think was knowledge, and how much of that was our skill and analysis?
I'd say pretty much all of that was skill.
That's right. I agree.
Yeah, it was just coming up with an answer on the spot. You know?
Yeah, see, but this is what makes you a good chess player. If you want to go from 1400 to 1500 to 1600 to 1700, buying a new opening book isn't going to help you much, because you can't even take a pill and memorize the whole book. Will it help you a little bit? Will it be a good reference material? Sure. Same thing with endgame books. Tactics are great. You need to know your tactics. You need to do, but if you can't analyze, that's the skill. Analysis and evaluation are the two skills that are going to make you a better player. That's the way you're going to find better chess moves, is if you can analyze this position better. If I had a room full of people who all claimed they were chess players, and I gave them this position, and I gave them 5 minutes to find the best move they could, and they could write down some notes on what they're trying to do, I could probably fairly well figure out how good everybody in the room was just by their analysis of any one complicated position, because all your skills come into play when you're doing this. And the better you do this, the better player you are. And that's how you become a really good player, is because you improve these analysis and evaluation skills. I once had a guy follow me on Twitter. I have the chess tip of the day on Twitter, and I have about 4,500 followers, I think. And I was talking about this issue a couple of years ago, and this guy sent me back a tweet, and he said, Dan, I've been studying chess. I've been playing for a year or two, and I assumed that chess was pretty much all knowledge. And I've been learning openings, and I've been studying endgames, and I've been reading principles, and I've been doing tactics. And those are the four main things that involve knowledge. And we've looked at all four of those things here, maybe not as much with the principles, but those are all knowledge. And he said, I thought that the way you became a really good player was to just acquire more and more of this knowledge. He says, but you've convinced me that I actually have to learn how to analyze, and I really don't know how to do that. So I'm just now learning about what analysis is and how to do it. But most moves in a chess game are primarily analysis, and that's what's determining your skill. Let's ask Stockfish, Stockfish 11, what the top 3 moves are here for white. Okay, Stockfish says white's completely winning. He is up a pawn and he has a pretty good position. It says knight to c4 is number 1. It says Mamadarov's move rook d3 is number 2. And it says bishop c1 is number 3. Now there's a fairly big difference between each move. Knight to c4 is plus 5.7. Rook d3 is plus 4.15, plus meaning white's better. And bishop c1 is plus 3.25. So Mamadarov's move is actually 2 pawns worse than the best move. But the more you are ahead of 1 pawn ahead, 1 pawn is about what it takes to win a game. The further you're ahead of 1 pawn, the less likely it makes a difference. Like, for instance, suppose Mamadarov's best move was plus 1, and the second best move was 2 points worse than that at minus 1. Well, that could be the difference between winning the game and losing the game. That would be a monster mistake to go from plus 1 to minus 1. But here he's going from plus 6 with the best move to plus 4 with his move. Well, plus 4 is still plenty to win the game. So even though he lost 2 pawns by not making the best move, it's not such a big deal, but it is a critical position. For instance, if he let's see what happens, what Stockfish says if we play king to f2. King to f2, Stockfish, what's the evaluation? Minus 1.8, now minus 2, with that move knight g4 check that we talked about. Okay, so that means if you were a bad enough player to analyze that you should guard the knight with king to f2, you would have lost 8 pawns in value. You would have gone from plus 6 to minus 2 by making that mistake. Pretty big blunder. So, of course, making bad moves in these positions makes all the difference. A lot of times you hear students say to you, Dan, I was playing a better player and I hung on for 20 or 25 moves and I had a pretty good game, and then everything fell apart and I lost. Okay, well, what's happening around move 20 or 25 that causes them to fall apart? Anybody want to venture on that?
Middle game analysis.
Yeah, I mean, the game starts to get complicated and they have to use their analysis skills, which they probably don't have. See, in the opening, they use their opening principles, and they could do what I call hand waving. What's hand waving? Hand waving is using principles to make a move, and then the hand waving mistake is to use principles to make a move when you should be using careful analysis. Well, let's say your opponent opens up the game a3 and you don't have a book move. Could you hand wave this move for black? And the answer is absolutely. There's no danger here. You could hand wave this move for black and say, yeah, I think I'll grab the center with d5 or e5. You're not going to lose the game by hand waving here. You could just use general principles, and it's perfectly okay. It's not a mistake to hand wave this position. In fact, that's what everybody would do. But if we go ahead to our other position here, you can't hand wave this position. You can't just say, oh, his queen's attacking my knight. I guess I'll just guard my knight with the king or something. You can't do that. If you do that, then no wonder you're going to fall apart, because now it makes a big difference. So when you're early in the game and you're just following general principles, you can hang in with people, and especially you can hang in with other players who aren't very good because not much is happening. And even if they're better than you by 100 or 200 points, they're probably not going to beat you if you're just following decent opening principles. But when you get into positions like this, what is it that makes that guy 1,700 and makes you only 1,500? It's his analytical and evaluation abilities. It's not the fact that he knows more openings than you or that he's better at the end game. I mean, it might be some of those things, but it's probably because he can play this kind of position better than you can. So when the game gets complicated, you know, that's when you kind of fall apart because of that. So when I started the seminar and I said, in order to become a better player, you got to make better chess moves. There's two ways to do that. If you're in the opening or you're in a tactical position where you recognize the pattern, or you're in the end game where it's a book end game and a deep end game, then sure, more knowledge is what's going to help you find better moves. But for most of the game, picking up more knowledge by studying more openings and studying more end games and stuff isn't going to help you that much. You need to do things that improve your analytical skill. And as we said, one of the main parts of analytical skill is your ability to visualize the position. Remember how I moved the pieces around and showed you what I was looking at when I was looking at those moves? And I said, you know, suppose white plays rook d3 and black plays knight h5 and white blunders and plays queen here and then knight here checks. Well, I was looking at these moves, but I wasn't moving the pieces. I was doing it in my head. I had the visualization capability of saying, if rook d3, knight h5, then queen takes b7 question mark, knight f4 check, forks the king and the rook, and I can't take the knight with g takes f4 because my pawn on g3 is pinned by the queen on g5. Well, I'm visualizing in my head the fact that the queen has moved off the square, the knight has moved over to here, and the rook has moved over here. All the rest of the pieces are exactly where they started. And I have to keep track of where everything is so that I can analyze that. So I'm using many, many skills when I analyze. I'm not only using visualization, I'm using deductive logic, and I'm using what I call chess logic. Things I learned over the years from playing over lots of master games and instructive anthologies and so on, where I pick up certain types of logic that says, well, if he's trying to do this, then generally you have to do this, or, you know, or when he does this kind of threat, then you have to do this kind of response because, you know, that's the way that it generally works. So I'm using sort of a deductive chess logic as well as regular deductive logic. I'm using other skills as well as visualization. There's a whole bunch of skills involved, but the main skill of visualization, I shouldn't call it the main skill, but the root skill, is the one where you have to be able to see what's happening or else you can't analyze it. And I have a saying that I've written in many of my books, which has been quoted I've seen in other books, and it is, you can't play what you don't see. And that saying, that little principle, you can't play what you don't see, applies to many, many situations. It not only applies to visualization, it applies to candidate moves. For instance, when I looked at the queen attacking the knight here, one of the first things I did was list all the candidate moves that might save the knight. I said I could block it with f4, I could block it with queen f4, I could guard it with king f2, I could move the knight to a whole bunch of squares, I could guard it with rook d3, I could guard it with bishop c1, I could guard it with queen c3, I could guard it with queen c1. Okay, so I can't play what I don't see. For instance, suppose you don't see that the bishop can guard the knight with bishop c1. Retreating diagonal moves are sometimes hard to see. Well, the computer said that's your third best move, and it leaves you winning the game pretty easily. But if you don't see that move and you don't consider it, how could you ever play it? So when I say that you can't play what you don't see, I'm not only referring to visualization, I'm referring to candidate moves, I'm referring to a whole bunch of ideas in terms of if you're not looking at something, you can't find it. So you want to get your hand around the problem. You want to know what are all the things I can do, and then once you have an idea what you can do, you can start looking at which ones are the best ones. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of work, and that's why these days where everybody plays on the internet and they play a bunch of 15-minute games and they think the fast games are the 5-minute games and the slow games are the 15-minute games, they never learn how to think this way. Because if I just said to them, what are all the ways to make the knight safe, by the time they answer that question, and they're playing a 15-minute game, they've used up a lot of their time just asking that one question. So all these people who play on the internet and they think a 15-minute game is a slow game, they wonder why they never get to be as good as Eugene is, or me, or Magnus Carlsen, or you know, how did those guys get to be good? I mean, I watched Hikaru Nakamura and Fabiano Coriano. I hate to say it, but I'm old enough that I was like a tournament director in tournaments where these guys were playing when they were kids. They were both from New York, and what would they do? Well, they would come down here to Philadelphia to play in the World Open and the National Chess Congress and the Liberty Bell. So I'd see these guys playing all the time, and that's how they got good. They played in a million tournaments, and they played slow chess. When I say slow chess, I don't mean 15-minute chess. I mean like 40 moves in 2 hours. And they played in a million tournaments. I don't know Eugene. He's a younger guy. Eugene, how many USCF slow tournaments have you played in where slow is at least 30 minutes per move?
You know, probably all of my tournaments are like that.
and how many have you played in your life?
I don't know, maybe like 200. I actually have no idea.
By the way, I make a claim that at least among the older generation where you know, we didn't have as many, I think I have played about as few USCF games as any USCF master almost in history. And I'm not talking about people who are foreign masters and came to the United States and played for a couple of years and retired. I'm talking about people who grew up in the United States. The total number of USCF games I've played in my entire life is 350. That's how many games I played, not tournaments.
Wow.
350. Wow. And it's funny, do you guys know who Jay Bonin is?
I don't.
Yeah.
Jay Bonin's an international master, and he holds all the records for most games played in a year and in a month and all that stuff. And I saw Jay at one of the tournaments, and it reminded me, and I told the guy I was talking to, I said, I've only played 350 games in my entire life, rated games, slow rated games. And Jay Bonin overheard me. He was only about 20 feet away, and he turned around and he said, I play that many every 6 months. And I said, Jay, I know. I said, the fact that I saw you is what triggered me to say that. So we had the two people who were the most opposite masters in the United States practically. Me, who I didn't start playing till I was 16. And then when I went away to college and got a job, I really didn't play much after that. And I started playing at 16 and played till I was like 18. And then I played a little bit after that. And then you have Jay Bonin, who plays like 600 games every year. Anyway, so the bottom line on our seminar here, and again, I'd like to remind everybody, this is a fundraising seminar. If you enjoy the video and you would like to see some more seminars, please let us know. We've got a GoFundMe page, which you're going to see, which if you learned something from today's video, we'd appreciate if you take. And again, I'd like to thank the Black Lives Matter Club. You're from Atlanta, right, Eugene?
No, we're from New York, actually.
Oh, from New York. Okay, sorry. I apologize.
Okay.
From New York, I like to thank them for inviting me. But we've just scratched the surface today. But today we've talked about that idea of in order to be a better chess player, you have to find better moves. And we've talked about the two main ways to do it, which is to have more knowledge and to memorize openings and book lines and tactics. But we've also talked about that enormously big subject of becoming a better analyst, becoming a better evaluator, becoming better at the other skills like time management and things like that. Time management, you could call that an analytical skill, or you could call that a separate skill. It certainly affects your analysis because your time management tells you how much time you need to take on every move. And I think every good player has an internal clock that's based on the time limit of the game they're playing and the complexity of the position. And they know approximately what's a reasonable amount of time to take on a move. Like for instance, let's take what I would call a trivially critical move, which is really a non-critical move. E4, E5, knight F3, D6, D4, F6, D takes E5, D takes C5, queen takes D8, check. Okay, so black has two possibilities. How critical do you think this move is? Anybody want to take a guess?
Not critical at all.
All right, John, what would you say?
I'm sorry.
Is this a critical move for black or not a critical move?
It's critical in the sense that he just lost his queen, but it's
Well, he didn't lose
trivial.
his queen. We took it off the board,
Right,
but it's his
yes.
turn.
No, so no, it's not trivial. It's pretty apparent.
Well, but the question is it critical, not
Oh,
trivial?
critical. No, it is not critical.
Okay, but critical means it makes a big difference on what you do. And if we look at the two legal moves here, the difference is between equality and resigning, right? So from a definition sense, this is about as critical a move as you'll ever have. But from a triviality sense, it's not a critical move at all. It's like, it's a dumb move. It's like, okay, well, everybody's going to play king takes d8. But Eugene, suppose you had a new student and they just learned how to play chess today, and you showed them this position. If they know from your first lesson that when your king's in check, the main thing you need to do is move your king out of check, and they don't know about capturing pieces, would you be a little nervous about your student maybe not taking the queen here if he just learned how to play chess?
Yeah.
Sure.
Maybe a little.
So it would be very critical for him, right? For a beginner, this is very critical. Like I've shown people positions like beginners. I say e4, d6, queen f3, knight c6, queen takes f7 check. What should black do? And a lot of beginners think, oh, you got to move your king out of check. King d7 is the only move. They just never think that you could take the queen. It just doesn't go high in their priority list. So the same thing applies here. e4, e5, knight f3, d6, d4, f6, d takes e, d takes e, queen takes d8. For anybody above beginner level, this is not really a critical move, or you might say it's trivially critical, in which case it's like, this is dumb. So how much time is anybody going to take on this move, even though it might be critical by some definition or not?
Second.
Yeah. They're all, in fact, this is one of those moves where I don't even write my opponent's move down. According to the Uscf rules, you're allowed to write 2 moves down at once. I wouldn't even give my opponent 5 seconds on the clock here. I would just recapture king takes d8, and then I'd write down both moves on my score sheet, which is legal. Being a senior tournament director, I know these things. So yes, I would play king takes d8, and then I'd write down both moves. Well, in that sense, it's not critical at all. But to a super beginner, maybe it is critical that he understands he could take the queen. Okay, well, these are the kind of moves that time management would say, you shouldn't waste any time. If you have a 5-second delay on your clock, you should move within 5 seconds so your clock doesn't run. If you have a 45-second increment on your clock, you should move in 1 or 2 seconds so that you can gain 43 seconds for later when you need it. Because it would be good time management here to take the queen fairly quickly and not let your clock run too much, because it's a real waste of time. Now you might say, Dan, why did you show this example? This is so trivially simple. It is, but time management is an important skill in understanding when you can play fast like this and when you can't. Let's take a position where he has 2 moves to where he could play it. Let's say it's like e4, e5, knight f3, d6, d4, knight c6, pawn takes, and now I play queen takes d8. Okay, well now black has a little bit more of a question. If he takes with the knight, he's losing the pawn. If he takes with the king, he can't castle. Now I bet if I ask Eugene which one black should do, he's going to laugh and say, this is easy. Eugene, which one should black play?
King takes d8.
Right, he's not going to lose the pawn. That would lose him the game. But a beginner might look at this and say, oh man, I brought out my knight and I guarded my queen, and if I take, I can't castle, and castling's really important. I've seen lots of people at the lower level, you know, rated around 1,000, play knight takes d8 here because they don't want to give up their castling privileges, because they don't know how to weigh those two things in their mind, losing the pawn versus losing the right to castle. They don't know what the value is. Eugene does, because he has more experience. And of course, I agree with Eugene. It's not a very hard decision. But here, Eugene wouldn't take much time. He would take with the king. But if you're a 1,400 player or a 1,300 player and you don't know that, you might spend a little time here, because it's pretty important to get this right, even though black has 2 things in. Both of them are negative, to lose castling or lose the pawn. And you don't want to get it wrong as to which one you're getting. So if you're a very good player, but you're not good enough to know which one is right, you're at least good enough to take some time here and say, I'm not just going to guess and to do this, I'm going to look at this for a little bit of time and try to get some value on whether getting my king caught in the center here is worth it, or whether I should just, jettison that pawn with knight to d8. So this is a little bit harder. And of course, this is much, much, much easier than the position that Mamedyarov and Nepo got to, which is way, way, way more complicated. Again, we can bring that up here, forward 48. Now our time management, Mamedyarov's time management told him that even though he only had 14 minutes to finish the game, he felt that it was worth almost 2 minutes of his time to play this move. So obviously his time management here told him that this was a pretty critical move. And it probably also told him if he plays the next few moves right, he probably should win this game. He's up a clear pawn. Okay, so again, we're wrapping things up. Today's seminar was on how to improve at chess, and one of the best ways to improve at chess is to become better at the non-knowledge positions. Become a better analyst, become a better evaluator. Now, we haven't talked much about evaluation today, but these are very, very large subjects. The first book I wrote when I was 23 years old, I hate to say when that was, the first book I wrote was called Elements of Positional Evaluation, and it's now in its 4th edition. And it was based on a course that I taught when I was the Philadelphia champion back when I was 23 years old. And I wrote a book on that, and eventually it got published. And it's about positional evaluation, but it's not about evaluating positions. It's about positional evaluation. It's actually more about evaluating when the pieces are good and bad. So this other skill, evaluation, is very important. Let me define it. Evaluation is looking at a position, especially a quiescent position. It could be one you're visualizing in the future that might exist, and asking yourself, which side stands better? How much better do they stand, and why? And when we turn on Stockfish, he answers 2 of those questions immediately. Which side stands better is the positive or negative in this evaluation on the left in parentheses here. How much better they stand is the number inside, not the sign. The positive or negative is who stands better. How much better they stand is the number, and it's measured in centipawns. So here, white is better by 4.4 pawns. It's jumping around, 4.18. That means he's 4.35 pawns to the better. When I say centipawns, I don't mean 4 is the centipawns. I mean 4 is pawns, and 0.31, it goes down to the centipawns. So 4.17 pawns ahead. So that's how much ahead he is. But why? Well, Stockfish can't tell you why, but Eugene can, and I can. And of course, that's why people go to Chess Masters and get lessons and stuff. There's a lot of things that we can do that the engine can't do. But that's another thing for another time. By the way, if you want to see more videos, my channel is www.youtube.com/c/Dan Heisman Chess, or you just go to YouTube and do Dan Heisman Chess. And right now I have 127 videos on all kinds of these subjects like we talked about today. Okay, I think I'm going to about wrap things up. Eugene, would you like to say anything?
Nope, I think you covered everything pretty well. Just a reminder to everyone to please consider donating for our fundraiser. We're more than 3/4 of the way there, and we are trying to help out the BLM movement. So please consider donating. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that announcement. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video. Eugene, did it come up to your expectation?
Yes. I
ahead.
actually learned some stuff.
I thought you might. It's funny. When I wrote some of my books, I had other masters reviewing the books. And one of the comments I got from a lot of my books were, Dan, when I was reviewing your books, I learned some things. and I said, yeah, I'm not surprised. One of the things I pride myself on is I try to do some things in chess that maybe aren't just found other places. When I wrote my books, there's only one of my 12 books that I wrote where I thought I was covering ground that you could easily find most in other places. I like my books like the Improving Chess Thinker and the World's Most Instructive Amateur Game book and Everyone's Second Chess book. I like to do things in that book that you can't easily find other places. So I like to think that I can not only help my students, but if Eugene's going to teach people, hopefully some of the things I talked about today, when I'm long gone and Eugene gets to be my age, he'll be saying, yeah, this kind of concept I talked over with Dan Heisman way back in 2020 when They were during the pandemic, and everybody's going to go, what pandemic? And Eugene's going to go, I'll tell you about that too.
Hopefully it's over by then.
Hopefully it's over
Yeah.
by 2070 when Eugene's my age, right? Okay. All right, very good.
Thank
All
you,
right, so
Dan.
I'm going to wrap it up, and I have to find where the pause button is. It's probably under more. Stop recording right now. See everybody next time. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button on my channel. And if you'd like to subscribe to my channel, hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time. Bye.